Chinese electronics dealers in Seoul are enraged over Japanese export restrictions. Tokyo's barred the sale of some materials needed by South Korean companies like Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix to make smart devices. They accuse Tokyo of unfair trade practices and harming Korean firms as retribution for a court ruling against Japan.
We urge Japan to stop its economic export restrictions, which are retaliatory action following last year's South Korean Supreme Court ruling on compensation for forced labor. We need to address Japan's globally recognized forced labor crimes against humanity.
In November, South Korea's top court ordered a Japanese steel company to compensate workers for forced labor and unpaid wages during World War II. But the Japanese government insists all such matters were settled under agreements that were signed when the two countries restored diplomatic relations in 1965, and it's challenging the verdict in an international court. Tokyo says it's restricting the exports to Seoul because it suspects they're being passed on to North Korea and that these measures have nothing to do with the row over forced labor.
This is a review of Japan's domestic procedure necessary to properly control exports. It's not a subject for discussions, and Japan is not at all thinking of withdrawing these restrictions.
Seoul denies the allegations and is threatening to retaliate if Tokyo doesn't relent.
The vicious cycle of actions and counteractions is not desirable at all for either country. However, our government cannot rule out countermeasures if the Japanese action inflicts damage on South Korean companies.
On Tuesday, both sides presented their arguments to an arbitration panel at the World Trade Organization. That's usually a time-consuming process, and if both sides decide to wait for a verdict instead of direct talks to resolve their issues, smartphone makers may have to put new orders on hold. Mobin Nasir, TRT World.
Well, earlier we spoke to Seijiro Takeshita, Dean of the School of Management and Information at the University of Shizuoka. I asked him about the likely impact of the tit-for-tat trade restrictions on both economies and on the tech industry.
I think it would jeopardize quite a lot. As we've been seeing the trade war between the United States and China, it doesn't do anybody any good. And this is also not going to do anybody any good. However, unfortunately, I think Japan had no other choice considering the fact that the Korean government had been extremely adamant about trying to increase their popularity through attacking Japan. And I'm not saying because I'm Japanese, but it's very, very clear that this is a typical populist phenomenon that you're seeing all around the world, in the United States and Great Britain as well. The Japanese government have been fairly patient about this radar eradication issue by the Korean forces or forced labor issue, which initially was solved in 1965, or this request of apology to the emperor. All these things which basically really hits the nerves of the right-wing, almost Japanese, is not doing any good because it only increases the tension of the two nations. And let's not forget that both Korea and Japan lives on trade. And this is one area where it's really being hit very, very badly. It would be only misleading to put the quantitative type of analysis when the basic foundation of macro issues are not set at all. We're talking, you and I are just talking about, Japan-Korea relationship, but the world trend right now is unfortunately moving towards protectionism and certainly trying to gain, one's vote in their own regime. And that certainly is really leading to the negative populism kind of ideology, regressing back very negative issues. So at this point, I don't find really the light at the end of the tunnel for this Japan-Korea relationship. Certainly, I think it will turn out to be quite ugly. And I don't think the third-party litigation is going to work.